Welcome to Powered by People, business podcast from Three Hills that explores how people strategies transform organizations. In each episode, we meet an inspirational business leader accountable for their business's readiness to win in tomorrow's world. I'm your host, Tim Pointer, a Chief People Officer and an operating partner at Three Hills, where we work with advanced organizational performance across our portfolio of outstanding businesses. Joining me today is James Hartley, a Chief People Officer and transformational leader with an international background in people strategy and business change. He has 30 years experience in HSBC and Swiss Re, most recently driving transformative, time-specific projects at the Nottingham and the Leeds Building Society. He is a Henley Business School accredited executive coach, fractional executive and board advisor, and, on top of everything else, business founder and partner in an independent veterinary practice. Let's go hear from James. James, welcome to the Powered by People podcast.
Tim, thank you so much for having me.
So you are known for leading people-centric change, always with a very clear purpose. It's fascinating when I think about the sector that your experience comes from, a sector where process and metrics from the outside are seen as being paramount. And what you have done across a range of financial organizations is really focus on people, purpose, and performance. How do you find realizing that within that specific sector?
Well, I think you're right, Tim. In financial services, those are the common things that are talked about. But I have a passionate belief that change is never won by a process or by PowerPoint. And for me, therefore, challenging a bit of that corporate status quo that actually purpose should be ahead of policy is what's driven me. Now, the reality is you have to have both. So metrics without purpose are meaningless, and purpose without metrics becomes intangible. So there has to be both. But where we are talking about metrics, they have to be in service of something other than in service of themselves.
Mm-hmm. So lead us into one part of your experience, because you worked in some very different organizations, different customer groups, different market positions, different geographies. So where would you like to take us?
Well, yeah, thanks for the opportunity. And where I'd like to start was actually a transformation of a people function, which was necessary to enable a business function. So we had to get our house in order first. And it really is that example of where you put purpose at the heart of everything we do. So the context was joining Swiss Re, a 15,000 people global insurance company, HR team of about 150 in my portfolio. And what I inherited was a fragmented team, no clear purpose, driven by spreadsheets of tasks, shockingly low employee engagement, and even worse, customer service, or customer experience. So there was a compelling reason for change, and clearly better processes weren't going to drive the change.
This sounds like a case of Dr. Heal yourself to drive talent, to drive engagement, to drive culture, to be at the heart of what is a joyful workplace, but you're not feeling it yourselves.
Oh, absolutely. And we often talked about be the change you want to see, which I know is a bit of a cliche, but it's right. If you don't understand change, you don't have a passion for change, and your engagement is low, and your customers are telling you that you're awful, your ability to then go in with any kind of credibility or enthusiasm to the business that you're there in service of is flawed from the start.
So what did you do?
So I mean that's where we embarked. So the reality was EMEA had no reason to exist without a common purpose. So the first thing was getting a team together across all levels of the organisation to actually define for EMEA HR what was our purpose? What was it that was going to unite us? So we wanted something that resonated if you were a payroll advisor in Bratislava or a head of HR of one of our major geographies, and met us where we were. So we came up with, together we act with courage, we inspire confidence, and we accelerate business impact as our North Star. Now, being a pedant for language, every word of that is important and carefully thought out, which I won't expand on that, but thought went into that.
Can I pick up one word, because it's striking? Courage. Why courage?
The courage to challenge the status quo. It's easier to sit there when you're beaten down, to sit there and continue to be beaten down. But if we wanted to have a voice, if we wanted to challenge ourselves and challenge the business, that required courage. And it's interesting you pick up on that, because it is those very human-centric words that were the foundation of change. So as we created a visual strategic narrative, it's a world away from a spreadsheet of tasks. And interestingly, Tim, it's also very anti-corporate. So the battle sometime with internal comms that you couldn't use this image or you had to use that word, actually, ironically, this is where the courage came in to say, this is our visual narrative. These are the words we're using. All of the words in the strategic narrative are emotive, they're human-centric, they're things that people connected with. And actually, many of the words were from the focus groups that we ran. So when people heard the narrative played back, it resonated with them. There was something in there that they'd said or said something similar to.
So not your language?
Absolutely not my language at all. So as a leadership team, we agreed the framework, and then by smart questioning, it's how do you feel now and how do you want to feel? Yes. What's that opportunity? And that's so powerful then, because it comes back to what I was saying. You will not win the war by PowerPoint. You will not win the war by corporate jargon. You will win the change war, if that's what it is, by creating a human connection. And it was building on that human connection that the second phase was something we called #TellOurStory, which was exactly that. Whether it was in the workspace or your personal life, how did some of our values, how did courage, inspiration, accelerated pace show up? And the richness of stories that came from that was just unlike anything anybody had seen before, and was so powerful then in creating that joint movement. It was when we started using that as a filter for our performance conversations that you started seeing the difference. So instead of, where are you on your 9-box grid? How are we going to calibrate you? We were asking questions about, where can you demonstrate that you've worked with your colleagues? How have you shown courage in what you do? Let's see examples of where you've accelerated business impact. And I think that was really what made the difference, because it wasn't then just a flashy narrative. These were our real conversations. All of our team calls started with somebody saying, how have I worked together this week? How have I accelerated business impact? And then they knew in their performance conversations, that's what we were going to be measuring.
It is a very long way from slapping some words up on a wall, isn't it?
As far away from that as you could get, consciously and deliberately. Because, we've all seen vision statements on walls that are given either no heed or no repetition effectively. But when it's embedded in everything that you do, it becomes your conversation. The visibility of it does absolutely start changing behaviours. Absolutely, it does. And that's what we saw, Tim, bringing it back to your question on metrics. Metrics with a purpose are good, purpose with a metrics are good. So we were able to see the change in behaviours influencing the change in culture. Employee engagement up 30 points over the 2 years that we ran the programme, to the highest in the group. Really at the heart of this, client satisfaction, which was languishing in the minus numbers, up 50 points. Agility, which became a core Swiss Re value about how quickly could you move. We were 18 points ahead of group. And all this whilst we're taking cost out of the function. And you can only take that cost out because you've made an emotional connection, because people are feeling more engaged and the business is feeling a difference.
So how does this come back to purpose?
So a great question, Tim. We put purpose at the heart of what we were doing. So it was the heart of the strategic narrative. It was the heart of tell our story. But we took it to the next level down about your personal purpose. And it was inspired actually by something the CEO at the time said, that if you get to know yourself better and you get to know others better, you'll create deeper relationships, and those deeper relationships will create joint movement, which I think is so powerful as a purpose or an ambition. And what we did was created our little book of why. So why are we here? Not only collectively, but individually. I invested time with every single member of the team for them to have an opportunity to define their personal purpose. And we put them together in a little book to exactly meet that objective of how through that process of understanding their own purpose, could they get to know themselves better, and how by sharing it, could they get to know their colleagues better. When we're geographically diverse, we're in different locations, we've got different roles. And what you saw was people using this as an intro on their calls. So if they'd never met the payroll advisor in Bratislava, they could look at this and have an immediate point of connection.
This feels a huge shift in terms of seeing people as people that have, families, friends, they're in different parts of the world, and that sense of different lived experiences. And there's a very overused expression, which is like, bring your whole self to work. That, as an ideal, only works if you are welcome and people are interested in who you are. And people want to understand the talents, because I think too often we draw upon a small element of what someone has to give.
Oh, for sure. And we could spend an entire podcast talking about what do we really mean when we say bring your whole self to work, because very often, as you say, we actually don't want them to bring other bits to work. But the breakthrough for this, Tim, was not exploring that for a philosophical reason. It was by telling stories. So when one of my colleagues stood up and said how an interaction she'd courageously had just by saying good morning to somebody she didn't know had stopped that person from committing suicide, as she later found out, right in that moment, you knew more about Dorte, her story, and her impact on life than if she'd stood on stage for 3 days talking about how she'd driven change in process. And people to that day still know that story. They know the story of Bongi getting somebody on an apprenticeship program in South Africa. They know the story of Sarah challenging a business leader about what they wanted to do with apprentices. Processes come and go, metrics come and go, but the fact that people still have the opportunity to remember their purpose and to talk about stories they've heard, that's where you've won hearts and minds.
It just makes you think in so many sort of team sessions, a leader will finish with any questions, and from their tone, the one thing they would love to happen right now is there be no question.
Yeah.
Well, what you're talking about there is
an environment where you're showing that you are going to meet people where they are, you're going to invest the time, you're going to create the trust. And am I right in thinking there's a certain amount of vulnerability that you have to bring in order to find that reciprocity?
Oh, absolutely. And on that second point, I took the decision as we started to launch this to talk about my catalyst moments. What were the influences on me? Again, inspired by the CEO having done the same to a small group of his leadership team. And that was the breakthrough moment, when you talk about the challenges of growing up, being gay, when you talk about some of the workplace experiences you've had, when you talk about challenging personal situations, you have immediately broken the veneer. Now, I'm not saying that we should all go around every day pouring out our innermost thoughts and feelings. I think we should do more of it, actually. But in the right way, with the right intent, showing that vulnerability was imperative in others then doing the same. So many of those team meetings that you talk about are broadcast.
Yes.
And what we as a leadership team tried to do was to create conversations and dialogue. So we had two guiding principles: that every team call would start with a colleague, not with me or a leader, sharing one of those experiences around what was important in our purpose, and that there would be absolutely equal time for questions as well as for information sharing. Now, that's hard sometimes, because as much as we put be courageous on our kind of vision, actually getting people to be courageous doesn't just happen because you've asked them to be. So there was so much in the background of calling out when people had been courageous, and in ways that colleagues might not have necessarily perceived as being courageous. And this is where it's human-centric. That all comes down to emotion or experiences, or how does somebody feel psychologically safe. It is so far from, have I gone through process 1, 2, and 3? And that's the shift.
How did you know that this level, working at this level of the team shared humanity, actually translated into a shift in business performance?
Well, crudely, look at the numbers. So the business satisfaction with the function went from -13 to +50. So, in terms of, did our clients feel they were getting a better service, a more relevant experience, and that the people function were stepping in to meet their space? Yes. Did the business capture the zeitgeist and see that a strategic narrative could do something different? Absolutely. So as a result of what we'd done in the function, the EMEA business unit created their own strategic narrative. Now, they used it differently and perhaps didn't go as far as I would have liked, but to see at the EMEA conference, the EMEA strategic narrative, which was anti-corporate in its visuals, frustrated the hell out of comms. But you had a group of people circling words that they liked in the narrative, crossing out things that they didn't like over time. And I absolutely won't claim cause and effect. I think that would be too much of a stretch. But you did see business employee engagement starting to go up. Now, there were a lot of other things we did. We humanised visits. We took the leadership team out of the head office to go to site visits, which, I know now doesn't sound very radical, but in the context of the time, it absolutely was. One of the aspirations in the culture at the time was to be more courageous. And this is where I'm a great believer that if you want your culture to be more courageous, you have to do things that require courage. If you want to be known for working at pace, you have to do things faster than you did before. And it sounds very simple as you say it, but so many cultures don't get that right, that you create an ambition, be it lofty, be it grounded, be it pragmatic. But if you don't change behaviours and do more of the things you want and less of the things you don't, you will not be surprised that your culture doesn't change.
So you got to a point where you had reduced the cost of the overall function. You had increased the engagement of the overall function, obviously higher productivity, and the appreciation, its performance within the business was huge shift, absolutely huge shift. And it was actually a pilot for a process of change across the broader piece. Absolutely fascinating. I'd like to move on to, I know that you then also led a piece of work across Swiss Re in terms of looking at their ESG journey. And I think this is fascinating in terms of, we think about the layers of stakeholders across any organization. You know, we have our employees, we have our investors, we have the partners that we're dependent upon, we have our customers or clients, and we also have society. And that question about what is our responsibility to society in terms of, be it planet or to the broader community. So what was the project that you undertook on that?
The project was, how did we build momentum in the employee connection with our net zero ambitions? So a deeply purposeful organisation. Purpose was about making the world more resilient. A deep theme of climate change and climate management throughout the business side of it. And what we'd had that was coming to its conclusion of its life cycle was an employee reward program, effectively. Well, the challenge was, do we carry on doing that, which was purely a monetary reward? Do we stop doing that? Do we do something different? And I was invited to lead that project with an amazing agile team to create something different, which became Net Zero U2, do your best, remove the rest. Working with the team in an agile way, which in brackets was already courageous because that wasn't typical of the organisation. So going to Exco, for example, and saying, we know what the first bit looks like. We think the second bit might look like this, and we've no idea what the third bit looks like, but please give us investment.
That sounds like courage.
Is challenging the status quo and is being courageous. So we turn the whole concept on its head from what can I get? Can I get a voucher? Can I get a reward? To what can I do? How can I be better informed? How can I take microclimate actions? How can I understand my own carbon footprint? And that then became the whole premise. And you made progress by completing tasks, doing education, making changes in your own lifestyles. Firstly, it was completely different in terms of mindset and impact. It turned traditional thinking on its head. But secondly, the way of delivering that change, being not perfect in a perfection environment, being co-created rather than being hierarchical, being agile, being adaptable, being iterative, putting humans again at the centre of the story, the whole approach to change, as well as the change in the product, was what made it successful.
And did you have any pushback from people saying, sorry, why are we putting time and resource into this? This is not our core products. These are not our core services as an organisation.
Interestingly, less pushback on that, because climate change and making the world resilient was such a deep part of the company's identity. So let's push back on why are we talking about this and is it important? The premise was accepted that it was. I think where the pushback came was, why are we talking about it like this? And why are we taking something away from our employees? So that was the question. Why can't I get my £10 voucher? And that's where the change comes, because we're actually changing mindsets. And it comes back to what we talked about earlier. We could have easily just changed the process by which you got some recognition for your climate actions. It would have been a hell of a lot easier. It would have caused a lot less sleepless nights. But that wasn't the purpose of it, because we were changing mindsets. And how do you change mindsets? You humanize it. So actually, ironically, drawing from the #TellOurStory campaign that I'd used in EMEA, we started telling climate change stories. What micro actions have you taken through an app that we developed with fabulous partners that you want to talk about? So how do we create that momentum? How do we create that joint movement? Tell the story, tell the story, tell the story, tell the story. Inspire others by what people have done. If you go up to a macro level, save the planet, that's a big elephant. And so we built into the app, how might you save a carbon ton from your household? And if you do these deeds and do these deeds, then you're well on your way to doing it.
And what were the results? So you're measuring number of people that are participating, you're measuring the amount of carbon, the carbon impact of their actions. What was the extent of the result?
It really, despite some of those challenges I talk about, caught the imagination of the organisation. So in the first 6 months, I think 5 or 6 months, we had over 4,000 downloads of the app out of a population of 15,000. So a third of the organisation were actively engaged to some degree in that. At the end of the first review period, the 5 or 6 months, we'd logged 150,000 microclimate actions, which we then translated into being 1,000 business class return flights between London and Chicago. And on top of that, in order to progress through the app's challenges, you had to take a quiz or take a test. Now, could we measure that? No, but it was a consequence, an obvious consequence, that if you have taken a quiz in the app about climate change, you are going to be better informed about climate change at the end of it. You just have to be. What you do with that then is measured in the deeds, but in terms of one of the core aims, are you better informed? Are you better educated about climate change? Absolutely.
Fascinating.
It's not even, Tim, about the metrics of the downloads or the deeds. It's about, are people doing something different? Have we delivered change in a different way? And have we humanized something? But those, for me, are far more exciting than the necessary scorecard that we have to show to Exco to demonstrate the investment that they've made.
Yeah, perhaps worth saying that the award you won was a business culture award, and the case study of the work that you led is there if people would like to read more about it. You've been working with the Leeds. Can you talk about the challenge that you were brought in to address and the work you led there?
And another great purposeful organisation, actually.
What the size of businesses?
So the Leeds is about 1,800 people, top 5 building society in the UK. And two challenges actually that emerged. The first that I was brought into was look at the holy grail of strategic workforce planning, which I'm sure will resonate with many of our listeners today, Tim. I think the problem was they knew they needed to do something to build capability, to address the technology changes, to equip the workforce. So the problems sort of loosely known, and what they'd experienced was a number of consultancies bringing in what I then called kind of boiling the ocean and sheep dipping approaches. Now, don't get me wrong.
Not at the same time.
Well, that could be an interesting development.
Don't boil the sheep and dip the ocean.
It's true. I'll build that into the statement of works in the future. Now, of course, there is a place for those well-refined models, those great platforms. So I'm not dismissing those at all. But for the context of the Leeds, which is a domestic dual product business with 1,800 employees, that just wasn't the right approach. So they asked me to come and work with their people team to deliver something that was bespoke, proportionate, tailored, and pragmatic. So worked with the team to develop that. Again, interestingly, introduced an agile way of working into the people function to help co-create it. And if I just pause there for a moment, and because I've used that word 2 or 3 times now, Tim, about co-create, and I just want to hover on that for a moment, that all of these projects we've talked about, be it telling our story, be it net zero U2, be it people planning, has all been in co-creation.
You never do to an organisation, do you?
If I'm to be true to my purpose about positive and sustainable change, then it has to be co-created for it to be sustainable. Otherwise, it will leave when you go. Now, it might iterate and change after you've gone, and you hope it does. But if it has been done unto them, then the chances of it having any kind of longevity rapidly diminishes. So I call that out because that's really important, I think, in all of these projects, which is scary sometimes because, you know, we've got years of experience and hopefully we like to know that we think we know what we're doing, but knowing what we're doing and inspiring others to do it is not the same thing.
So you're not arriving with an answer. You're arriving with methodology, curiosity, a set of questions.
Absolutely. And principles and ambitions that can evolve and iterate as you go. And I think there is genuinely huge power in that. And I remember feedback from earlier in my career that I was overfilling the glass, that in my enthusiasm to share everything I'd learned or all the perspectives I had, I just gave more and more and more and more. And of course, what happens then is people just disengage. And I remember a particularly biting bit of feedback that, you know, it was easier to do what James said than challenge James. And when you hear that, you think, okay, I need to create some space in that glass. Now, hard as that is to hear, but what happens when you create that space in the glass is people have to think for themselves. People have to bring their own ideas. People have to bring their own energy because they're seeing it make a difference.
Yes.
So, and that's very much been a principle that I've tried to live by. And that same principle was then true in building the strategic people plans for the Leeds. They weren't perfect. They were iterative. They created space not only for the people team, but for the business to kind of shade between the lines. So it was about involving people. So we used a framework that resonated with the business, because I think they'd been concerned initially that it was mono-focus, and actually saying to the business that your strategic workforce planning is a combination of your culture, of your capacity and productivity, of capability and skills, and yes, cost. And I think that was a really interesting connection for them because they'd seen all of those potentially in silos before. So we'll do some cost efficiency over here. We've got some great cultural programs over here. We know we've got a productivity challenge. And that for me was really important. So what is the business actually talking about? It's not talking about strategic workforce planning. That's a nice label that we've created to make ourselves sound smart. What the business is talking about is, have you got the right people with the right skills at the right time, doing the right things in the right culture?
It means that you're not giving an answer, Bill. What you're doing is you're creating a live environment in which there is no plan. There isn't an end to this.
Absolutely.
This has to be constantly organic, constantly, that agility in responding to the organisation.
Not something that was done unto them.
Yeah.
So the process that we developed, the ownership is very much with the business. Yeah. This is your people plan. Now, what we did was created a framework, but developed lightly facilitated conversations. So if we come back to the point of, it's a massive beast that's hurtling towards us, puts the business off, saying to the business, can you do 4 1.5-hour conversations over the next 6 weeks about your journey, your destination? Yes, actually we can. And can at the end of each of those sessions, you have a deeper insight into the topic and some takeout actions? Absolutely. And interestingly, what we really had to try and encourage was trust the process, that it might not look immediately obvious where this is going, but I can guarantee that after a series of 4 conversations, 5 conversations, you will start having clarity, and they did, and it finesses, and then you get into the cycle of quick wins. So you've talked about a very particular example in the finance department. We haven't got any of these people who are going to be able to do Python coding. Okay, well, our very first action is next time you have a vacancy, hire one of those. And suddenly that connection between...
That sounds really simple and reductive, but this is action by action.
But that is then your strategic workforce plan. Yes. We don't have this skill. We need this skill. I'm going to get this skill. Yeah. And that's done very simply. I'm exaggerating a little bit for effect, but I think this is the whole thing, that we can lose ourselves in complexity. We can lose ourselves in it having to be boilerplate, or that everybody has to have the same experience. Meet them where they're at. Make it simple, make it accessible, make it actionable, and you will start building the momentum. Now, as I say, it doesn't work for every organisation, so you have to be thoughtful about it. But I think those principles are absolutely valid, irrespective of size, scale, or complexity.
I have one final quick question for you. Aside from everything else, you are a founder. You and your husband have created the London Cat Clinic.
Yep.
Fantastically veterinary practice here in London.
Thank you.
Is there so obviously at Three Hills we work with an awful lot of different founders on this journey. Is there something completely different that you have discovered from that journey to all of your work across these, very, very scaled financial institutions?
I think there's one difference and one similarity, Tim. The difference is how visceral it is when you are an entrepreneur or founder of a business. And we all talk about the commercials of the corporates and the organizations we've worked in, but how tangible and real that is for you, for most employees, is quite distant. When you're running your own business and the decision to hire somebody or not hire somebody, to open nights or not, and it's your money on the line. Your perspective of what it means to be commercial and the emotional engagement that takes is light years away from what I've experienced in corporate. So I think that's the biggest difference. The biggest similarity is how culture can make a massive difference. So right from the start, my husband and I and the senior leadership team agreed that alongside clinical excellence, it being a commercial venture, culture would be as important. And we have lived and breathed that every day since. So our values are CATS, not by accident. Committed, accountable, trusted, and striving for excellence is as much part of what we do as is the clinical excellence. And then I think you put a wrapper around all of that vets and nurses and the front of house staff in veterinary practices are very different to some of the corporate colleagues I've worked with, but all the more brilliant and rewarding because of that.
James, that has been fantastic. We have gone around Europe and back. We've talked about different organisations, different scales, different projects. Insightful from start to finish. Thank you so much for sharing your experience with us on the Powered by People podcast.
Pleasure, Tim.
Thank you for joining us. Please follow Powered by People, podcasts from Three Hills on people-powered business transformation on LinkedIn or wherever you access your podcasts. Join us next time for more inspirational insight from people leaders who craft people-first approaches that enhance revenue, profitability, and long-term value creation. I will see you next time for more Powered by People.